We have an amazing panel here with a lot of diverse background. And I want to invite each of you to introduce yourself and also address, I'm going to ask you to be optimistic. Where are the areas where you see, from the work that you do, a potential for bipartisan progress, consensus building over the next 4 years? And we'll start. Where should we start?
Ladies first.
Ladies first. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me, for that great introduction, and for this panel discussion. And also, I echo what a phenomenal panel to follow with John here. So my name is Hilary Braseth, and I'm the executive director of an organization called OpenSecrets. And OpenSecrets has been around for about 40 years, and we track basically money in politics at the federal and at the state level. We look at lobbying, spending, we look at also campaign contributions, and our team has coded all money in politics data points over several decades by industry. And so you really can track the trends of what are lobbyist groups doing at scale relative to different issues and policies. And so you can better understand the forces shaping policies. And so when it comes to this conversation around the energy and environment, a couple things come to mind, and I'm going to pull up my data points here. I really believe that the energy and climate space is actually less of a battleground between scarcity and abundance and more a battleground of financial power. If we look at the first half of 2024, oil and gas for the first half alone spent $72 million on federal lobbying, and that put it in the top 5 industries of lobbying spending. And in contrast, environmental groups spent about $46.4 million, so a little more than half of that same amount during the same period. And if we look at the last 20 years, since 1998, fossil fuel interests have spent $2.8 billion, which is 6 times more than environmental groups. And so when you look at these figures, I'm just curious for the audience, who would you presume on which side of the aisle are energy lobbying dollars going to? Oil and gas. Which side of the aisle are I heard someone back there give a guess? Yes. The vast majority of money from oil and gas goes to folks on the right side of the aisle. And what about environmental rights? Largely the left. It's a little more bipartisan, but largely the left. And it's important because the perception from the public then continues to cast this issue, in my belief, as partisan. And so when you ask for what are the potentials for moving forward, is I think there does need to be a bipartisan message, but also a bipartisan effort from where the money goes. Because the public sees these numbers and it starts to discredit the efforts on both sides of the aisle, and then folks that run for office tend to use this issue as a political battleground to gain more money toward their campaign. And it ultimately puts this issue further down the agenda in terms of making real progress. So really, though, the area that needs to be tackled is this intertwining feedback loop between candidates benefit from this issue being polarized because they can have a strong stance and gain more money via lobbying or contributions. And ultimately, the public, us, ends up being disadvantaged because this issue gets wrapped up in the quagmire. So all that to say, I would recommend that transparency is critical. I think oil and gas can be more transparent about lobbying, spending, and also environmental rights groups can be more transparent. Dark money has continued to be an increasing force in election cycles. 2024, we had about $1.3 billion in dark money, and that's up almost half relative to the last presidential cycle in 2020. I'm happy to go into more detail about what dark money is, but all that to say, we need more transparency. We need a shared set of facts in order for compromise to even be possible and for both sides of the political spectrum on this issue to be willing to sit at the table together.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, EarthX, for allowing me to participate in this panel and in the convening or the Congress of Conferences this year. I'm Allie Kelly. I'm executive director of a Georgia-based nonprofit called The Ray. We work nationally in 30 states with transportation agencies and also with Class 1 railroads and short lines on innovative infrastructure and advancements in infrastructure projects that fall outside of the traditional norm of transportation infrastructure. And specifically, we're one of the leading groups in understanding how the empty and underutilized rights-of-ways, which are the roadsides of the interstate and highway system, as well as railroad rights-of-ways, can be used for energy infrastructure in a way that facilitates siting and permitting for these projects and essentially drives down the cost of energy infrastructure and also vastly accelerates its development and deployment. As a nonprofit, we don't really produce publications or white papers or think pieces. We're really pivoted to facilitating project development. And we've had a direct hand in the development of right-of-way solar with storage, as well as EV charging stations and electrification infrastructure. And we're one of the groups that leads the country in the development of the mapping and analysis software that can tell us exactly where on the highway and railroad rights-of-ways that solar arrays with storage as well as the transmission grid can be built out. This is obviously a bipartisan concern and an urgent need for the country to both modernize the grid as well as develop new geographies of grid. I'm sure it's been touched on many times during the day, but as you know, we sit in a very perilous time, as David Tice spoke to on the lunch programming, not only with the security of our grid, but also with the unique pressures that are on the grid. I would share with you that FERC estimates that renewable energy generation contributed 90% of the new capacity to the grid in 2024 in this country. So we know that renewables are being developed with speed because they are the lowest cost, quickest to market energy generation option. At the same time that we are onboarding renewables at an unprecedented pace, we're also seeing exponential load growth. Most discussed is the load growth associated with data centers, as we're involved in a global competitiveness for AI and quantum computing prowess and superiority. But of course, we also know that the policies of the previous administration, as well as the Trump administration, prioritizes the onshoring of manufacturing and logistics and supply chain. And we are beginning to see the reward or the fruits of the CHIPS and Science Act hit the ground with more semiconductor and advanced chips manufacturing, which is another large load that is coming online as we are seeing exponential load growth of data centers. Just a level set on that, data centers alone, the load is expected to be 2 to 3 times the capacity that is currently available on our grid. So we have to double or triple the capacity of our grid in order to only and just meet the data center load, and that is not considering the backdrop of onshoring and manufacturing that we have seen and will see in this country. So we're seeing exponential growth in both generation and in load or demand, and we need to not only update the transmission lines that we already have with reconductoring and other grid-enhancing technologies that will allow us to do more with what we already have, but we're also going to have to create new geographies of transmission grid to make the connections between the generation and the load. The question before Congress and the administration is, where do we hang those lines? Where do we go with new transmission? And that has been one of the key or primary delays in the development of transmission heretofore. Transmission in this country takes somewhere between 15 to 20 years to fully develop and deploy, and we really need to get that down to 3 to 5 years. So what the rights-of-ways offer, first and foremost, when you go into the highway rights-of-ways, you have a single landowner in a state, and that's really important for multi-state or interregional projects. On the highway right-of-way, that single landowner is the state DOT. If you go into railroad rights-of-ways, you have a single owner operator for multiple states. So you have a vast simplification of the complex activity and the expensive activity of private land aggregation for interregional or multi-state transmission lines. Also, when you go into the interstate right-of-way, you already inherently have environmental permitting facilitation. So existing US code extends the easiest or most facilitated form of NEPA to projects that occur within the fence lines. That's a categorical exclusion. And then finally, you actually get to thread the needle with community concerns and with private landowner rights concerns when you go into the rights of way, because you don't deal with eminent domain, you don't deal with NIMBYism because it's already publicly held land. When you go into community surveys about where they would rather see transmission lines built, they would vastly prefer those transmission lines to be built on the rights of ways as opposed to through their communities or through other types of greenfield like national parks and indigenous lands. So it's a bipartisan effort that we're engaged in that appeals to both sides of the aisle because energy is economic development. Energy is the key to making onshoring successful. Energy is also competitiveness, global competitiveness, and the race for AI and quantum computing. As our former US Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, put it, whoever captures AI and quantum captures the global advantage, and whoever has energy has these. So energy is economic development and prosperity. It is competitiveness. And speaking to the energy dominance piece, local energy supplies and being able to connect local generation with local demand or local load is also important. And transmission can be the key, as well as microgrids. I think we can't leave any tools in the toolbox, but we have to leverage all tools in the toolbox, including the siting and permitting efficiencies of the rights of way.
This is one. I'll just take it. It's easier. I'll take yours. Hi, everyone. Cathy Reheis-Boyd, and I'm President and CEO of the Western States Petroleum Association. And we represent the women and men, hundreds of thousands of women and men in the oil and gas industry in 5 Western states. So we represent Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, and Nevada. And I would say for Arizona and Nevada, they don't have any refining or crude oil production, so a lot of their fuel, 80% goes to Nevada from California's refineries, and then 33% goes to Arizona's refineries. So that's the connection of the 5 states. And I would say, I think the one thing I'd like to reflect on is I just got back from Norway 2 days ago. I'm amazed that I'm even awake, actually. But no, it's too exciting. My first time at EarthEC is motivating me. But what I was struck by was the ability of that country to come together with business, government, labor, and the environmental community to put all their combative narrative aside and solve problems. Absolutely amazing. So there was no aggressiveness towards the oil and gas industry. There was an embracing of them and the ability that they could bring money to the table to invest in all of the other things that were needed for the country. Amazing ban of all landfills and using biomass to energy with CCS, constructing a very large CCS facility to deal with the carbon management of the country, their electrification of the ferries, their transportation, everything they were doing, they came together to solve collectively. And I just reflect that on California, where unfortunately it is the opposite. Doesn't have to be the opposite, because I've been doing it 40 years, like Jennifer and I have been on this topic forever. But we used to do everything like Norway, and then we stopped. And I'm trying to figure out when we stopped and why we stopped, but we stopped. But we took the lead out of gasoline. We rolled out 3 burning, cleaning gasoline. We make the cleanest gasoline on the planet. We took lead out of gasoline. We took sulfur out of diesel. I mean, on and on and on and on. The collaboration that we used to do and the progress we used to make was because we were not siloed in our different corners, which we are now. And so I think what I brought back from that trip, and we had 9 legislators with us. It's under a foundation called, California Foundation for the Economy and the Environment. And what I brought back from that was the trust, the pragmatism, and the collaboration. And those were those 3 things that were just resonating in every, delegation meeting we had, every visit, every tour we took. Those were the 3 things that I took back, and with hope that we'll have a renewed interest in getting back to sort of collaborating and co-developing policies. So it's not politics over policy, it's policy over politics. And if we can get back to that, these are all solvable issues. None of this cannot be solved. And so I think that bipartisanship, that collaboration, that consensus building, I'll be looking to lean in more on that as a result of this trip, and to partner with the communities and with the environmental justice community, with the environmental community, and try to, in a way, bring business and government and those entities back together to co-plan on how we can get from where we are to where we want to go. Because frankly, technical realities can get in the way of aspirational goals, and they do, and hope is not a plan. And we've got to deal with both of those in California. We can get in that in a little more detail.
So I already yammered for a bit, so I won't repeat the fact that I, if you didn't gather before, I'm a lawyer. I do land use and environmental law in California, and everything is a battle, whether it's expanding someone's backyard patio, literally, or building a new town, or over the years, building new transmission lines, new pipelines. Absolutely, the linear infrastructure we already have is the obvious pragmatic solution to getting onto that linear infrastructure as quickly as possible from energy generating locations and zipping it off to where it's needed. On an optimistic basis, I always go back to the 2016 closing year of the Obama administration, where he proclaimed, I think, one of the most amazing success stories of environmental policy of all time, which was the 2016 fleet of passenger vehicles got rid of 99% of smog-forming emissions. Just think about that. What a triumph. But what did we not do? We didn't say, you can't drive. We're ending home ownership. Welcome to the land of a $3,300 a month one-bedroom apartment for life. That is today's climate dogma. And I'm going to make a couple more extremely uncomfortable observations. There is a deep left movement in Berkeley, no surprise, but elsewhere, that does not believe in capitalism, that does not believe in upward mobility. And through a variety of kind of social constructs is embedded arm in arm with the same folks that were not on the side of what I view justice after the October massacre. There is a deep, deep resentment against those that have. On behalf of those that have quite a lot themselves, they're in grad school at Columbia. I mean, it's a little unclear. But they're very visible, they're very strong. They have strong media allies. A commentator called Michael Lind, whom I like a lot, described a phenomenon called chain ganging, which is philanthropy, again, Bill, joining and insisting that all their grant recipients support each other. And so once you support each other, what does it look like to have collaboration with the, quote, enemy? And the enemy among groups is almost everyone in this room. I don't care where you're from. You're not far enough left. And so we see this playing out all over. And in California, we are, I think, prime sinners. And so my prescription on a bipartisan basis, which is in part captured by the Abundance book that Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have written, is enough with the lawyers, enough with what Nick Bagley at University of Michigan Law School, used to be the chief counsel for Gretchen Whitmer, calls procedural fetishism. Enough. We have to build. We must build. And we need to build what makes incremental progress, because that's how we got rid of 99% of smog-forming emissions from tailpipes. We incremented our way there. And we did it in ways that, frankly, didn't allow too many victims. We didn't say, we're not going to ever let you be a homeowner. Or we're going to eliminate the only job in California where someone without a fancy high school degree actually can earn $100,000 or more in the oil industry or in a manufacturing sector, which is equally energy intensive. And so the other sort of big switch that I would very much like to, I love, by the way, the carbon trading kind of border concept, but the other big switch is stop this lie, the lie in this room, that reducing carbon within geographic sub-areas matters a whit, except if you make money from that kind of engagement. Have a good time and be careful, as my grandmother would say. Excellent all-purpose advice. But it really isn't advancing the ball. There is no way that India or China are going to end coal. What are you kidding? Or Africa. It is plentiful, it is cheap, and energy means wealth. It means food. There's no way. So can we do an Apollo project to capture and otherwise make coal less of a global warming feature? Sure. Do I represent any coal interests? Of course not. Who does anymore? I don't know. I'm sure there are, but I don't. But the fact is, unless we approach this at the scale of an international political, economic, justice, and technology challenge, we're engaging in something my son engaged in quite a bit when he was 13. I'm told by my husband. So incrementalism, really building, and that is, I'll end with my little nerd space, which is CEQA and NEPA. We did a study that Breakthrough Institute published, actually, on NEPA challenges through the ages. And NEPA is a pretty lame, ultimately, frankly, statute. It requires years and years and years of study. It ends with litigation for anyone who has the resources to decide to litigate. And the courts almost invariably say the government's right. And ultimately, the project NEPA hurdle is passed if there's still project support economically or politically, and NEPA is a big stall game. The point I want to make is that study, which looked nationwide at 10 years of appellate court decisions under NEPA, had an equal number of fossil fuel and renewable energy projects targeted. The other thing people fuss about is forest management, and we haven't even touched on that. You know, every year or so now, California is burning enough wood mass from completely artificial forests. These are not the forests I grew up with. You could see through those forests. So I'm on a nonprofit group that hires a tribal consultation folk, and we go clear forests and get them back to normal. But that's not what they are now, right? What they are now is a tinder of catastrophic wildfire risk, which burns and completely negates anything that we've otherwise been doing from a regulatory perspective to get rid of greenhouse gas. So NEPA is used to fight forest management and block an equal number of renewable and fossil fuel energy projects. Why are we doing this? And I'll stop with that.
And John, you're going to bring us home. I want to let everybody know, though, being mindful of time, after John speaks, we're going to open it up to you for questions. So over to you, John.
Thanks,
Good to
Bob.
see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again, Bob and Bill. Good to see you. Thanks for having me here. I'm just going to set this down so I think my mic's working. My name is John Szoka. I'm going to start with a little bit of 1-minute biography on me because the path on how I got to be sitting on this stage, I think, has interest, and it applies directly to your real question is the country going down to hell in a handbasket, or do we actually have some hope for this country with the obvious dysfunction in DC right now? So me, West Point graduate, 24-year career in the Army, airborne ranger infantry guy. So I am a conservative, let me just put it like that. Not that there aren't liberals in the Army. Retired, started a few small businesses, got angry at the state because I felt like they were charging too much in taxes because I did my own taxes. Ran for the state legislature in state of North Carolina, won, served 5 terms. My first term in North Carolina, I had a number of people from NGOs come in to me and tell me how I was destroying the earth, did not want to save the polar bears, things like that. Then a person came to me, a lobbyist came, who represented North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. Now, I knew that she was Republican, which was a good start. Not that I dissed the other people. I talk to anybody and everybody because I can learn something from every person I talk to. She said, what do you think about solar energy? I said, I think it's a big boondoggle. It only exists because of federal subsidies, and I don't want to see it in the state of North Carolina. And she looked at me and she cocked her head a little bit and said, well, we have a little bit different opinion about it. And I said, oh, what's that? So she told me what her opinion was, and it kind of made sense. I failed to mention I also have a master's degree in engineering from University of Texas. I said, okay, so what's the point there? The point is you got a conservative Republican, thinks solar and wind, a bunch of hooey. Somebody who I trust, not that I don't trust everybody who came into my office as an elected official, but she was Republican. I knew her bona fides. People stood up for her. So it's not just the message, it's the messenger. It's not always just the message, it's who's delivering the message of the messenger. So, long story short, the rest of my career in the legislature, I went from solar skeptic to solar champion, passed a number of really big solar bills at the time when I was there. North Carolina was number 3 and installed utility scale solar. Since then, it's fallen down since the rest of the country seems to figure it out that solar actually is not a boondoggle. It does work, and it's the lowest cost form of generation. Retired after 10 years. I'm now the CEO of an organization called the Conservative Energy Network. Conservative energy, and we're a network. We operate in 26 states, mainly right-leaning states. We operate at the state legislature level. So in essence, what we try and do is reinvent the experience, the aha moment that I had in North Carolina for state legislators so that they pass good legislation and kill bad legislation. And yes, for those of you who wonder, we do have people in the state of Texas, and it's only because we have such good people in the state of Texas that are tied in deeply to the Republican circles, working with our allies in the environmental space and others, that we're able to defeat some of the really, I'll just say it, bad bills last session, and we're working on some bills that educating legislators on things to bring the light to them, if you will, so that they don't continue down a wrong path. We also work in siting in 13 states with industry partners, siting for utility scale solar, wind, batteries. We go into counties, talk to county commissioners, talk to planning boards, zoning boards, individuals, everybody in these small little towns where the fact of the matter is that most clean energy, solar, wind, batteries, it's put in rural areas because land's cheaper. I mean, we all know the reasons why. And those are mainly conservative areas, be they in California, be they in New York, be they in Texas, they're mainly conservative areas. Just remember what I said about my conversion from skeptic to champion. It's not just the message, it's the messenger. So my folks go in there with the name of Conservative Energy Network, and the project is called Land and Liberty Coalition. Instead of the reception like this, people are like this. You know, they're willing to give you a chance to talk. So they talk. We, in the 3 years that's been going on, we've assisted developers in siting over 10 gigawatt of utility scale solar, wind, batteries in the states we work in. And right now, all my folks are working on another 45 gigawatt of clean energy. And let's throw geo into the mix, okay? We're there too now. If I could find anybody in the nuclear industry that would want to be a partner with me, I would go inform people about that because there's a lot of misinterpretations about that. So that's who I am, that's my history, that's how I got here. And now, to answer your question directly, is there optimism? Can we get together in bipartisanship? I think that's the wrong question to ask. And I wasn't on the call, so this is my fault. I should have warned you about this. But,
Go for it, John.
But what's the important question to ask is, what are the important things we need to get done in the country? Right-of-ways, build more stuff, stop all this going back and forth. In California, well, you said it better than I ever could. So what's important? To build more stuff, don't look for people who are willing to work as bipartisan, because there are on each side. Those are the people. Okay? All politics is local. What we need to do, and what I focus on doing, is giving more people this aha moment about, well, what I thought about offshore wind, that it kills whales. Hopefully everybody knows here that that's just garbage, okay? But there are some people who actually believe that. So the people who don't know, those are the people I go to talk to get them to press the green button for yes in North Carolina instead of the red button for no. And the only way to do that is to take the priorities that we all know what's important in this country, transmission, generation, the AI thing. We all know that. Everybody at EarthX knows this. But you have to have the right messenger, giving the right educational message to the right people who will switch from bah humbug, it's all a bunch of hooey, to duh, I get it. You know, palm forehead, I get it. I can vote for that. That's what drives bipartisanship. There are already a number of people in Congress, particularly, who are in the climate caucus. They believe in it. You know, Senator Curtis from Utah, a great champion of climate change. That's what I do, and I'll hand it back to you.
That's fantastic, John. And I agree with you, like, bipartisanship is an outcome, and then you can have enduring policy, but you have to come at it through the lens of the person you're talking to. That's such a powerful point. This has just been fantastic, so I want to thank you. And again, applause for the panelists.